intitolato RE-ENCHANTMENT of Nature, Reincanto della natura, un incontro che vede ospiti in un dialogo inedito l'artista Rossella Biscotti e l'antropologo Michael Taussig, ai quali do anche il benvenuto. Compost è un progetto realizzato da Titolo, Nero e Castello di Rivoli Museo d'Arte Contemporanea in collaborazione con il Vite de Viet Center for Contemporary Art di Rotterdam, con il sostegno della Compagnia di San Paolo nell'ambito del bando Ora, produzione di cultura contemporanea, con il contributo della Regione Piemonte, l'ospitalità di Du Parc Contemporary Suite e la collaborazione di Film Commission Torino Piemonte. Compost è basato su un'idea che ho elaborato assieme a Sofia Hernandez Cioncui, direttrice del Vite de Vite, e che curo con Francesca Comisso e Luisa Perlo per A Titolo, Lorenzo Gigotti, Valerio Mannucci e Valerio Mattioli per Nero. Ispirato alla definizione elaborata dalla filosofa e biologa Donna Haraway, è un progetto transdisciplinare in cui la nozione di compostaggio incontra quella di ospitalità. Con i suoi rimandi ai concetti di suolo, scarto e fertilità, il compost è il luogo della mescolanza e della trasformazione continua tra stati della materia, in cui far convivere allo stesso tempo simile e diverso. Il progetto nel corso del suo svolgersi ha fatto emergere le due principali direzioni, quella organica che riguarda le questioni ecologiche in tutte le varie articolazioni e quella sociale che prende in esame le criticità politiche ed economiche del nostro tempo. Ed è proprio in questa duplice declinazione che si sviluppa anche l'incontro di oggi. Questo 10° appuntamento è il frutto delle riflessioni dell'artista Rossella Biscotti, affrontate nel corso delle sue ultime ricerche in occasione della personale al Vite de Viet di Rotterdam nell'autunno del 2019 e proseguite nel 2020 all'Institute for Contemporary Art di Singapore e in Malesia, ricerche che l'hanno condotta nelle piantagioni di alberi da gomma e di palme da olio, accompagnata dal libro rivelatorio di Michael Taussig, Palma africana, un libro che si concentra sullo sviluppo dell'industria di palma da olio affrontando il caso in Colombia. In Palma africana l'antropologo Taussig affronta il tema della distruzione della natura con le sue foreste e le sue specie animali causata dalle coltivazioni intensive di palma da olio e naturalmente le sue implicazioni politiche e sociali sulle comunità locali. Egli osserva come, qui cito le sue parole, il mondo disincantato del business e della sua scienza diventi reincantato attraverso la morte e la distruzione e avverte la responsabilità di una ricostruzione attraverso un linguaggio adeguato, definendo con il termine di reincanto un punto di vista sciamanico che intende il mondo come sospeso in una sorta di incantesimo o stregoneria costruita sulla morte. Ed è proprio di questi temi che questa sera converseranno Rossella Biscotti e Michael Taussig. Prima di passare la parola agli ospiti, alcune brevi informazioni biografiche. Rossella Biscotti è un'artista il cui lavoro attraversa l'installazione, la scultura, la performance, il suono e il cinema, frutto di collaborazioni interdisciplinari e lunghi processi di indagine e studio, sviluppa progetti contraddistinti da un rapporto attivo con la storia. Le sue opere racchiudono meticolose stratificazioni di materiali e significati che mettono così in luce la dimensione sommersa del nostro presente. Tra le principali mostre personali ricordo quella tenuta al Vite de Viet nel 2019, la mostra sempre personale presso la Kunsthaus di Baselland e di Muttenz in Svizzera nel 2018, la personale al VAC Foundation a Mosca nel 2016. Tra le numerose mostre e rassegne d'arte internazionali a cui ha preso parte ci sono Dhaka Art Summit in Bangladesh nel 2020, la 55esima Biennale di Venezia, la 13esima Biennale di Istanbul nel 2013, Documenta 13 a Kassel e Manifesta 9 a Ghent in Belgio nel 2012. Michael Taussig è nato a Sydney, dove ha studiato medicina, è stato medico di bordo, ha studiato antropologia alla London School of Economics e nel 68 è andato in Colombia per unirsi alla rivoluzione, cosa che dice non ha mai smesso davvero, anche se ha finito, come lui stesso afferma, per insegnare antropologia in costose università americane fino a luglio di quest'anno. Ha scritto numerosi libri come The Devil and Commodity, Fetishism in South America, pubblicato per the University of North Carolina Press nel 1980, e tradotto per Deriva Prodi nel 2017 con il titolo Il diavolo e il feticismo della merce, Shamanism, Colonialism and the Wild Man, uscito per University of Chicago Press nel 1987, Mimesy and Alterity per Routledge nel 1993, My Cocaine Museum, pubblicato nel 2004 e uscito per Milieu nel 2019 con il titolo Il mio museo della cocaina, e i recenti Palma Africana e Mastery of Non-Mastery in the Age of Meltdown, pubblicati con University of Chicago Press rispettivamente nel 2018 e 2020. Infine, legato da un'amicizia, un'affinità di spirito e di idee con il direttore del Castello di Rivoli, Caroline Cristo Bacargir, fece parte del team di Documenta proprio curato dal nostro direttore nel 2013. Ora lascio la parola ai nostri ospiti, ricordando che si può interagire con la conversazione con domande attraverso la chat board di YouTube alla vostra destra dello schermo, e ringrazio gli ospiti per questo preziosissimo incontro. Buona visione a tutti. Arrivederci.
Grazie. Grazie Marianna di questa. I started talking in Italian, but actually the conversation will be in English. And I thank Marianna for this introduction, and especially thanks Michael Taussig for participating in this conversation, and also for the long email exchange which we had in the last days, and also night talks. And I will start with a brief introduction of the work, and I will share a screen with some of the images. And this introduction will mention, Michael, your narration in relation to enchantment and magic realism. It will mention your narration of enchantment and magic realism as a form of oblivion, and how the disappearing of the bodies that you also quote Gabriel Garcia Marquez' 100 Years of Solitude, in the disappearance of the body in Palma Africana are also, as a form of political violence, are also very present inside of my work in general. I will talk mainly about 3 works, and then we can exchange conversation going through the palm oil plantations and the olive trees in Puglia. We'll try to start with the sharing of the screen. I will most probably quote also from your book Palma Africana, that is a book that is very dear to me. I traveled with it in 2019 during a trip in Indonesia that has been mentioned. I was there researching mainly a flower called Amorphophallus titanum, that is a core flower, and I was reading your book, so I wasn't really planning to go into the plantation at the time, but somehow this book influenced the way I also looked at the research I was doing, and then we will see together how influence also later even my look on my own on Puglia, that is the region in Italy where I come from. So here you see your book with some lights game with them, and these flowers, which is called Amorphophallus titanum, is a core flowers. That means that is actually a flower that is almost never visible. So I went in Indonesia, in Java. There is a botanic garden that is very famous. It's called Bogor Botanical Garden, and it was called Buitenzorg. It was founded in the 19th century by the governor of the Dutch East India, and it was a botanical garden in which they were doing experiments, and also experiments in relation to agriculture and cultivation. And it crosses again the story of the oil palms, because it says to be the garden where the first 4 seeds of Western African palm were brought to and were experimented their cultivation. Then was implemented in the rest of Southeast Asia and mainly in Sumatra. So going back to this flower, this cork flower, I find it very interesting because it's a flower that actually blooms every 7-8 years in nature. Is endemic from Sumatra. And so the majority of the time you see it, as you see the image here, so it's actually invisible. And when it decides to bloom, it takes 2 days. It grows under the ground as a giant bulb, and then it blooms, and is the artwork Life Feed that I did inspire in relation to the flower. But you see it here in the left image, that is an image from the... sorry? So it's a flower that when it blooms is considered up to now the biggest unbranched flower that exists in the world, and it's called cork flowers because it's called cork flower because it smells of death. Basically, it smells like a flesh, a rotten flesh, because it has scientifically it has a very little time to attract the insects that will impollinate it. But of course, this flower became a sort of marvel, and it was people were traveling to visit it. Here you see it, I think it's already in the botanical garden of Bogor in the image on the left with the botanist, I believe Beccari, which was one of the botanists that was around the Bogor Botanical Garden and discovered the flower. Made it known to the West, this flower. And I became very interested because actually this flower is not so present anymore in nature, but has been, all the botanical garden has been competing for having it in the collection as a specimen, because it's an extreme attractor of visitors. And is actually not present in nature, but it blooms constantly in YouTube. So you can follow it 24 hours. It's always under camera, and you can know through app where the flower will bloom, and you can then reserve your visit to the flower, or you can follow it live stream through the media, to YouTube or through the apps. And and of course, it's always very very important, the smell component, because it's very strong and is very commented, and it's actually the corp of this flower eats up in the moment in which is in a maximum of its bloom. It eats up to a temperature of a normal human body, which is 36.5 degrees. And so I realized a work called Life Feed. This at the exhibition of the former exhibition space Vita de Vit, in which there is one unique textile in which the flower, in a way, blooms constantly and is represented through one silkscreen print, and also, in a way, through its shadow. Here you see also the spectators and how the flower has been cut to see through, and then maybe because in the botanical garden it needs to be impollinated by, so it will not be impollinated by insects, but it will be impollinated by the people working there. So, this is a second flower, which again wasn't present at the Bogor Botanical Garden, but also has been part of my narration, and this is the plant that Taussig is actually a parasite, and it's called Rafflesia arnoldi. And I really actually find this plant very beautiful because in itself is a sort of creature, and it has this really strong lians and strong body. And the Rafflesia, I do not have an image with it, but probably you have seen it because it has bloomed lately, and it was on the news very, very often. Is a very red, gigant flower. Again, its dimension can be 1 meter, 60 centimeter, 1 meter in diameter, and but I mainly use this image with, again, I found in the annals of the Bogor Botanical Garden to talk about bodies, which is also something that reconnects me to Palma Africana book of Michael, which are dismembered. And here you see 2 flowers, a male and a female, which has been taken apart and placed for the photograph, of course, that you see here in the image. So this is the base of this other work, which is called Dismembered Rafflesia. I use really the idea of this flesh, again, that is of the flower that has been cut in pieces and displayed like a still life on a sort of like a natural background. And also you see this, I install it as a sort of flag. The Rafflesia is in many countries considered very precious, and is also a sort of national flower, and is so it also identified with the country of Indonesia. Indonesia identified with the Rafflesia. And so these 2 core flowers somehow were I traveled to the Bogor Botanical Garden to not to see them, because of course I knew that they will not be present, as they only appear every many years, but to see how also the narration of this flower was displayed and was brought forward. And then very briefly, there is another work that probably we will mention in the moment in which with Michael we will talk about materiality and how to give form to a narration that talks about bodies in a magical form, and this is a work that is I usually call it rubber works. They are a series of portraits, and they are portraits of female characters from a book. The book is called Baru Quartet, from later author Pramudia Anantatur, Indonesian author Pramudia Anantatur, and is a wonderful book that actually is a wonderful 4 books, is a tetralogy, in which from which I extrapolated some characters that are somehow minors, but also very important inside of the narration, and they are all female characters. The narration of the book is in between the time between the 19th century and the beginning of 20th century, and the main character is Minke, is a native from Java that they studied in the best Dutch school at that time, and then through a series of encounters and through questioning his condition and condition of his of other citizens at that moment, he starts to talk mainly through articles and the first newspaper to talk about riots, for example, in the sugar plantation, and the rights and the injustice that were perpetrated against the native population, and then started to talk, for example, about the first boycott and how to achieve rights through boycott, and then the narration, of course, is very complex. It goes through the four books, but I extrapolated this character, and I'm going to talk mainly about one, and I realized them in rubber. The rubber, again, is something that I encountered in this trip, and of course, the plantation were very important at the time, and I think also they were initiated in the beginning of 20th century. And for example, the rubber that I used in this piece it comes from a multinational. It's called Sokfin, which invests in rubber plantation and in oil palm plantations through Southeast Asia, but also in Africa. And it was very important to me to choose a rubber that is natural and is historically somehow connected to the history of violence that this material the trees and the people went through. And so this rubber actually comes from a plantation which is in Sumatra and was the first plantation. The seeds were brought directly from Congo, from a Belgian entrepreneur, and planted there in 1909. Of course, probably these trees are not existing anymore, as the trees in the the old palm trees in the botanical garden of Bogor, the first trees, the mother trees, are not existing anymore. But for me, it was important to really work with the material that was coming from this history. And I will come into this narration, into the body of this work, through one character. She is called Surati, and she is I think, in the second book of the Baroque Quartet, and she is a peasant, young woman, and she is her father works as an administrator in the sugar plantation. And as it was, and we understand in the text, she was somehow already the second generation of women, which were, we already encountered Niarion Tosoro, or her previous name was Sanike, which has been given as concubine to a sugar mill manager, a Dutch sugar mill manager. So we already went in the book through her story of exploitation, and then we encountered Surati, which is her niece. And Surati is, as I said, is a young woman, and her father is asked by the manager of the sugar mill plantation to be given his daughter as a concubine. And of course, there are many discussions within the family, and also because the position of concubine, besides being his own daughter, but the position of concubine was not seen well in the social structure of the village. But then after a while, Surati says to the father, okay, it's not a problem, I'll go. And within this narration, there is always an element that is the batik, that it's, of course, it's a dress, a cloth that is a cloth that makes the women beautiful at the time, is done with a lot of attention, with a lot of within a lot of time, a lot of care, and carries on symbology of flowers mainly, and symbology that comes with a series of culturally also within the location. But it's also like what I discovered is the only item a woman, a native woman, could carry with her. So the only item that it was of her possession she could have. So she packs her batik, and then instead of going to the Dutch manager to give herself, she walks to a town that is a town in which that has been infected by smallpox, and is basically in lockdown, has been isolated. And then she managed to enter through a wall, and then she lays down with the dead bodies, and she hopes to get infected. So after that, she goes out, she dressed with her beautiful batik, she make up, and then she goes to this man, to this manager, to give herself as a concubine. The end of the story is that, of course, the infection, it goes through to this man, and then it goes through the whole town. So basically, she creates this explosion of infection of smallpox, and then the man dies, and then she remains. She managed to survive, and she remains deformed in her body. So it's what you see here is a detail of this portrait, and for me is an incredible story. Of course, in many levels, and I try to convey also the story through the material, which is a rubber, which is a material that it carries a lot of history, but it's also in this form that is a sort of very thin cast. It becomes a sort of skin. It has a body in itself, and is a material. This is a iPhone picture at the end of the show. Is a material that transforms itself. So I choose this work also because with Michael we have been talking also about materials, and for example, the oil of the oil palm, how is a material that contains many things. This is also elixir, and it keeps transforming in many objects, and it enters our body or it enters our houses in many ways. And I think this idea of transformation, it will come often in our talk. And so here you see how the work, of course, this portrait of Surati has been changing through the time of the show, has been changing through the light that was entering the exhibition space, and also has been casting the shadow of the drawings of this sort of batik drawings that I redraw, and on the surface of the other skin that is underneath. So I thought also this symbolic work will be interesting just to spark our question. And as you see, it's from 2019, so I was also very it's incredible to see it now after what we have been going through, also in relation to COVID, and to rethink about this form of the infection, and now this young lady has been using the infection to, and also in a form of violence, but also to break the chain of this more silent violence that was enduring and happening in that time. So through that, this from the Sokfin plantation, and then you see palm oil and rubber. And I later, through crossing with the sugar palm plantation, and thanks to the book Palma Africana of Michael Taussig, I did want it, and Becoming Palm, which he wrote also when he was in Singapore, I believe. And also traveling through Malaysia, I wanted to see what is to be in a plantation, and how does it sound, how does it feel. So I traveled to Malaysia in 2020 from Singapore, and I have a couple of videos. This is a video taken from the bus as soon as you enter Malaysia, so shortly after, and how the country becomes basically one oil palm tree after oil palm tree. So is basically, and this what you see is actually in this other video. This is actually the one before. Is actually I guess what I believe is an old plantation which has been cleared to then replant again young palms. And I just want to mention that I didn't really actually work with the plantation. I visited a mill and I met paradoxically with investors, because I wanted to see what was how they presented to me the plantation, and this one, and for example, by being in the car with one investor that also was for 25 years, he was employed to clean the jungle of Sumatra to make space for the plantation. We were driving and going towards the mill, and I don't have photograph because I could not take photograph at that time. And he was saying, look, right, left, in front, how beautiful it is. It's all green. So it was described as a plantation as being very beautiful and very green. And when I was in this mill, I actually saw the whole process, so which was split in between the creating the biofuel from the fiber and the oil palm from the knot, and then at the end of everything, I found a little mountain of dust, which was the dust of the palm trees after the whole process. They went through the whole vapor and the whole process, and it gets basically trapped by a filter and then is recollected. And I went home with this bag of dust, thinking about how is incredible that this material still contains a lot, even being just like the residue of everything. And through this, let's say through this trip, actually, besides meeting with friends and get to know more about oil palms, I actually arrived in Italy when and in Puglia, that is the eastern bottom side of Italy, where I come from, and I could relook at what was happening in the landscape in a different way. So the last video I'm going to show, it comes from Puglia, is made like a few months ago, where I have been there for a few months now, and is actually Puglia since 7 years has been hit by bacteria. So mainly the olive cultivation of Puglia has been hit by a bacteria called Xylella fastidiosa, and is basically that has been desiccating the whole olive trees on the region. I mean, on part of the region. And this already happened, the symptoms on the tree started to be visible in 2013. And, but of course, I wasn't there since 1 year. So when I returned, I could really travel through landscape of dead trees. And also I started to think about how the olive trees in which I grew up is a sort of monoculture, which is something I knew, but I didn't experience in this way before. So I think this is somehow the introduction from which we will start. I'll start this video in which you see no, not this, sorry. Next. I don't know for which reason it's not going fluently, but you'll see the landscape is just from my car driving through. I will stop the sharing, and Michael, are you there? And maybe we can start from there. I had a series of questions, but I think I don't know if you want to. I thought, would you want to comment starting from this, or?
Let me start with the observation about the relationship between the corpse flower and the oil palm and the olives. It's extremely intriguing, this plant, the corpse flower, and it seems very different. Your interest, it seems very different in the flower compared with the plantation crops. Here is an exquisite plant which has all the oddest features you could imagine. It needs 7 years to come out of the earth. It has the temperature of human being. It smells like a corpse. It's being monitored, screened, so you can watch its progress any minute of the day. There's none left in the wild. It's sort of in captivity. It's the fetish of the fetish. Whereas the other plants we're talking about, the oil palm and the olive, are huge industrial crops. Of course, we always tend to think, or I always tend to think, of the olive as very innocent. It's Greek, ancient Greek. It's biblical. It's like salt. You know, salt is a sacred substance. So the olive tree. But when I think about the olive trees I've seen in my lifetime, they're monocrops. They're monocrops, just like sugarcane and oil palm, and now in Colombia, marijuana grown by indigenous people is also a monocrop. And a lot of us get angry about monocropping and see all the problems that come from it, maybe the end of the planet. But when it comes to indigenous people growing marijuana in this way, we sort of don't talk about that. I wanted to think I asked you a question in general a long time ago, and Marianna put it into the introduction, which was a stupid question, but it's absolutely inevitable, and that is, what is the contribution? What sort of contribution can art make to environmental problems, to environmental consciousness, and so forth? And then one sort of steps back and says, well, that's too big a question. I can't handle that. I couldn't handle that. And I want to talk a bit about how I myself found a path. Now, I think the thing is, one doesn't have an answer to big questions like this. One has a reaction, and you react, and you keep following the leads that this reaction has come to. And so I see what you showed us now in this first half hour, a reaction to, I guess it's nowadays called an existential problem. My thought, my thoughts have had a lot to do the past 5 years or so about the impossibility or difficulty of putting words and images to the depth of the horror, the depth of the disaster that's facing us. I keep wondering about things I read about environmental destruction and the inevitability of it, and so forth. They sort of leave me cold after a while, and I was wondering what sort of language in image or words could we come up with? And one of the thoughts I had was what I call the negative sublime. It's a phrase actually I found used before me by someone else, and that is something so awesome, so huge, so grand, so gripping that it defies representation. It lends itself to what we could loosely call a religious response. But what sort of religious response? And I was thinking that the negative sublime lends itself to what Georges Bataille called dépense, something which went beyond the limits of representation, too muchness. And he characterized all human societies as indulging in one way or another. Different cultures had their own way of going off the deep end, choosing the fast lane. This intense sort of freedom, including the freedom for self-destruction. And for the 20th century, he included war as the prime example of dépense, or wasting. Well, now it seems to me the whole planet is involved in this dépense. And I wanted to think about this poem of Emily Dickinson, American poet. I'll read out the 2 paragraphs. The last night that she lived, it was a common night, except the dying. This to us made nature different. The last night that she lived, it was a common night, except the dying. This to us made nature different. We noticed the smallest things overlooked before, maybe like the corpse plant. We notice the smallest things now because of the death, things overlooked before. By this grand light upon our minds, italicized, as it were.
Yes.
So here was an introduction. Here was a stimulus. Here was an invitation to think how the world looks different when she is dying. And Dickinson chooses the things you took for granted, the smallest things, suddenly take on a completely different light. And that's what was guiding me, I think, in my work on oil plantations and destruction. I might tell you that since 1970, a long time, I have been working as an anthropologist, writer, and so forth, with peasant farmers in Colombia whose land is being absorbed by plantations, particularly sugar plantations. And so I'm very sensitive to this transformation in the type of agricultural production. Now, there's a book by the South African writer, a novel, J.M. Coetzee. It's famous Nobel Prize-winning writer, and he has a small work called Dusklands, one of his early works, and it's about a U.S. soldier in Vietnam who works on psychological operations, trying to freak the enemy out, through psychology. And this man, who's very antipatico, has in his head psychological stuff is bullshit. We would win this war if instead of psychological warfare, we used mythological warfare. And so the story develops. So I agree. What would it be to indulge in mythological warfare at this point in the history of the planet? So I see all these remarks and all these images of Rossella's as fitting into our attempt, or an attempt, to create something like mythological response. You might not like the word warfare, so I'll call it a response. Now, I also noticed that in the beginning of Palma Africana, there's a quote from Deleuze and Guattari, Mille Plateaux, which reads like this. Now, you can think of me as a writer in this regard. It's a bit pompous to call yourself that, but I'll do it. The quote goes, "Writers are sorcerers." We could say shamans, maybe. "Writers are sorcerers because they experience the animal as the only population before which they are responsible in principle." And that answered my question why there are so many animals in this book which should be dealing with the palm tree. But these animals keep popping up all the time. But that's a separate discussion for another day. What I wanted to focus on was a sort of shamanic, and I put commas around it, because I think there's a lot of bullshit in this word too, shamanic flavor that's in this book on Palma Africana, which is motivated by intense destruction and death of nature, the moving of people from their habitat to go where? To die, to go to the cities, to whatever. And I sent Rossella a diagram. Could I have a look at the picture? Mm-hmm. Lorenzo?
If you want, I can put it, or... Shall I share it, or it's going to be... I'll share it.
Yeah. Now, this is a sort of...
I will remake it quick.
Yeah. It's a crude... Yes. It's a crude diagram that I drew up the night before last for this conversation. There are 3 columns: art, alchemy, politics. There are arrows joining each of them that go left to right, right to left. They're connected. Under art, I have a photograph of my friend Simran Gill, becoming a palm tree. And in the introduction to the book, next to the photograph of Simran becoming a palm tree, I don't know if you can see me on the screen, but she's sort of covered with palm leaves and a whole bunch of palm nuts on her stomach. And I say, as of this writing, my artist colleague, Simran Gill, is becoming a palm oil tree in the Straits of Malacca in Malaysia. Next step, biodiesel. Palm oil can become biodiesel. This is big news, or is it? Such metamorphoses from human to tree, or tree to human, are maybe not that miraculous today. Something strange is happening. It's all mixed up and confusing. Used to be like the Cold War, us here, them over there. Subjects knew their place. Objects were meek and would never dare trespass. But now, objects, you have nothing to lose but your chains. Palm oil is already in half the packaged goods in your supermarket. By 2020, world production of it will double from what it was in 2000. Not only Simran, but you too are becoming a palm tree. So that's the column of art. And now, under alchemy, which you can also paraphrase as chemistry, I have this martini glass with this orange liquid, which is the palm oil. An elixir is a magical substance that comes in, you read about in fairy tales. And this is to emphasize the fantastic mimetic potential, mimetic power of palm oil. It can become diesel fuel, and the Economic Union buys a whole lot of Colombian palm oil as diesel fuel. It's very important to the Colombian oil palm industry, which is a huge and growing industry, displacing so many peasants and so much rainforest. Okay, but it can also become paints, fingernail paint, plastics of certain sorts, and is in half the food that you can buy in the supermarket. So it's an elixir. It's like a magical substance. And I wanted to emphasize that chemistry has become like alchemy. And the chemists are working very hard to promote what I would call one mimetic revolution after another, like a fairy tale, metamorphoses, just like Simran becomes a palm tree, so palm oil can become everything. And the third one, politics, emphasizes with this lightning stroke the paramilitaries. As they're largely invisible, I simply drew a symbol. The paramilitaries are connected to the most rich people in Colombia. The world is a world of facades. The world is a false world. In reality, you can never be sure what it is. It's always hidden by different sorts of screens. And so the paramilitaries, and behind them, the mayors and the governors and the cabinet ministers and the presidents, they're all mimetic animals. They all change. They work in the shadows. You know, you can fill in the dots. So that's why I saw these three things as vitally interconnected in what I called the metamorphic sublime. Now, I wanted to say that we can go back now. I wanted to just sort of finish off here because of time. I wanted to focus a little bit on my way of reacting, my way of living with this metamorphic sublime, with this planetary dépense, with this negative sublime, was to think a lot about form, how I would present this book, and how I would practice mythological warfare. One of the let me just I wanted to create a text which I call serpentine, which I guess for shorthand you could call fragmented, and that's very blasé and that's very obvious now, anti-narrative and all that sort of stuff. But I wanted to give it some special qualities. One of them was not write a book with chapters, and it's a fairly hefty book, 200, 300 pages. What is it? 250 pages. Was to just write paragraphs which are disconnected, but you can find loose sorts of connections. I wanted the writing to be very influenced by diary entries. I wanted it to be influenced by drawing, fieldwork drawings. I wanted it to be very influenced by lists. No, it's just simply write down long lists of things and contain a voice in which the writing becomes that which it is writing about. So the writing becomes that which it is writing about. I think I'll there's a little paragraph here that I just caught my eye. As for me, I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing as I go along. It's not a case of thinking first and writing afterwards, but of thinking reality through writing in its shadow, or should I say writing its shadow. This is not terribly conscious. It's more that I was led by the nose, like writing a diary. Writing a diary, you skid between events with the heat averaging 40 degrees centigrade. Things rise up in writing as in a dream, or more likely as in a speech. That's Joyce. Other things then take their place. The pace is unhurried, like the place where I was, and while there is no obvious order, there must be some sort of dance going on between disorder and order, such that this dance, if that's the word, provides the movement, whereby the unconscious of the writer meets the unconscious of the reader via the pace of the place, turned inside out by eruptions of violence and the clammy constant of fear. So that's the sort of voice I try to work with in order to do justice to what I call this negative sublime affecting us all. So I wanted to think of the re-enchantment of nature, which is after all our subheading for this talk, with the images of Puglia, images of the olive plantations, very much in mind as a crucified reality. And when I say re-enchantment, I don't mean I don't mean a fairyland. I don't mean something positive. I mean something like the end of the world. It's a. When I think of some of Max Ernst's surrealist paintings or drawings, he can also, at the end of the Second World War, you get all that. The surreal is not. It's not fun. It's not fun anymore. It's not absurd. There's something else absolutely terrifying about it all. And so it's that type of surrealism and that type of re-enchantment that I found to be more real than anything else and offer possibilities for extending further this program, you might say, of mythological warfare. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. I have a question in relation to this. That is, you were talking about the form and about how to talk about it, and and also at a certain point you mentioned in the Palma Africana the magic realism as the idea to fight the magic realism that is this sort of spell that you mentioned as well with magic realism. And I believe later you also talk about mimesis, which I think is very important, and is so I wanted to ask if you could briefly talk about mimesis and transformation as a way to as a sort of art, as a way to talk through and to break this sort of spell of things, of disastrous things.
Okay, two things. One is I very, very rarely use the phrase magical realism because it's been commercialized and commodified, and it's just become bullshit. Mm-hmm. But, you know, Garcia Marquez has written magical realist texts which are exactly macabre and dark, like I described for Max Ernst. I'm thinking of the Chronicle of a Death Foretold, Crónica de una Muerte Anunciada, for example. Also, one of his last works about kidnapping, which is a sort of moment by moment by moment of several people, 3 or 4 people kidnapped. Sort of almost takes you into the inside of their head, minute by minute, in a tiny little room. I mean, it's beyond horror. So if that's magical realism, that's what seems to me to be most honest and real about the current state. Now, this drawing of mine, this crazy little drawing about the mimesis, to answer your mimesis question, suggested to me oil palm in particular, but also politics, contemporary politics. I mean, I'm thinking of Italian politics. I'm thinking particularly of Berlusconi. I'm thinking particularly of Trump. And Trump is not alone. Trump got 74 million votes and Biden got 79. I mean, what's the difference? It's that close. Trump was an extraordinary shaman. I mean, he's a really negative charisma, but to his followers, he seems like a god. I've heard people say that, you know, they touch him and so forth, and his trick is to spit on them, and they still love him. They love him more. That's the point. So this mimetic quality, like I described for the paramilitaries, the mayor, the governor, the president, this ability to slime your way through, people call it a post-truth era that we live in, that seems to me to engage the skills of a shaman on heavy drugs, like ayahuasca or yahe, that I know fairly well. At the same time, as you can see with products like oil palm, you have this elixir, this mimetic elixir in itself, and also a symbol of what we can do now. We can do now, what the chemists can do now, what the biologists can do now with human bodies, human cells, and plants and animals. So my feeling was that part of the postmodern era is this acceleration in mimetic capacities, whether they be biological or whether they be political. Mimesis is an art of deception, an art of transformation. So the mythological warfare would then demand, if they transform, I have to learn to transform against their transformation. And it's a cycle, and it keeps going and going. In a nutshell, that's what I was getting at. Your corpse flower doesn't seem like something that could be mimed very easily. It's totally unique. And that's what I think of the corpse flower. It sort of stands out like the solitary signifier. No one can copy me, the flower is saying. But I can be televised.
It seems we just started, but I see we are kind of on the time. But I don't know if we want to open up or we want to go through other questions. Actually, I just want to mention that you were also in Puglia last year. So in a way, this reference of the Holy Tree is quite interesting, because you have been there, you have been seeing it, and And I have found, for me, it's been very important to be there after the palms and after the traveling to the palms, and also, yeah, thank you for telling me about the collective anthropologist that is working in Puglia, Collettivo Epidemia, which which is quite interesting, because now after 7 years there is a renewal kind of interest. Somehow everybody could not see anymore the landscape, so the landscape was becoming invisible to the local people, or to the people that got used after this extreme tragedy to the death of the olive tree. But now after we are in this pandemic, again we start to look at it differently, and also because it's basically we went through the same language. So our zone became a red zone. It was a contaminated zone. The plants could not go out. It was isolated. There were some asymptomatic. We were looking for symptoms. There were constantly laws that were put up the citizens to say, okay, eradicate the tree, bar the tree. And all of this, it was constantly with no giving numbers of how many trees were there, how many trees they had to be eradicated. So I think it's this, what I notice is like now this created, going through this COVID era, it created a new look towards this landscape. But at the same time, I think there is a necessity to stop thinking of this landscape as a cemetery, and to stop mourning for it, and to think of different ways that are beyond the olive tree cultivation.
I have not been to Taranto. I've been in,
Taranto.
but I didn't see the olive trees. But I have a friend. I have a friend who's extremely talented in Italy, Janos Chiala, and he is a talented photographer and has sent me photographs of the olive trees. And I must quote what he said. I will not lie. Walking through a burning olive grove at night, dead olive trees, right? But walking through a burning olive grove at night is by far one of the most amazing things I've ever done in my life. And the photos are amazing too. It's as if the spirit of the trees is finally set free after centuries of exploitation. And it's a powerful sign that millennia of olive cultivation as we know it are coming to an end, and something else is about to begin. So that captures your sentiments about it's the end of something and possibly the beginning of something else.
Yeah, this is impressive, and I must say that while I was wandering through the landscape and making photos, and I started to collect ashes of the olive trees that were burnt, and while communicating with friends and sending the images of the landscape in which I was in, usually the answer is very beautiful. And then when I will explain about the death of the olive trees through the bacteria and everything, they would say, okay, it's horrendous. So there has been this passage that you describe as well, and it's been quite impressive to look at these olive trees that were considered like somehow monuments and very powerful. Also because some of the old ones, the millenary of the tree, have particular shapes. But as we know now, I mean, we knew, but we didn't want to see it, and we didn't want to. They are shaped. They don't have shapes. They are shaped. And actually, what it happens is that after this olive tree dies, and probably you have seen pictures, the roots maybe still shoots out some branches that are called polloni. And these polloni are actually the wild olive tree. So before that it was nested. So it's quite interesting how the wildness of the olive trees, it comes at the end of his life.
Like a novel.
I don't know if, Marianna, we can open up if there are questions or it's...
Mi sentite? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
And can you see me also? If I'm entering the... Okay, I should be now with you. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for your presentation and such an evocative, rich, poetical presentation throughout your different practices and researches. You've been very generous, and there are so many aspects that you raised, and in particular, I've been so touched by the description of this lack of life in this palm oil plantation on this infinite desert landscape, and the image of this other cemetery of the olive forest in Puglia, now invaded by this bacteria of the Xylella. And the description of the definition of this negative sublime, a sort of horrific enchantment, which is the result of a magic realism that went crazy and sick and beyond the limit of representation, and a sort of way of reacting to all of this through mythological response, maybe poetry, new representation, languages, you know. The joke with languages can really help in the construction of a new imaginary, a new narration. So thank you so much for all this. I would like to invite the audience to be part. I know that it's not so easy to be part through YouTube, but maybe from the Regia, they can let us know if there are some questions. Or maybe a few questions can jump into the conversation while let me see, now at the moment there are no questions, so I take the occasion to ask you something that among, you know, that you've been invited to be part of this large project titled Compost, and the main theme the Compost want to bring to the attention. Compost highlight the generative and fertilizing power of the host. You know, the compost is a neologism, so to go back to the language, it's a neologism composed by the term compost plus the word host. So I would like to ask to both of you, as artists and anthropologists, how important is for you and in your practice the relationship with the other, and who and what is the other for you, who is the host, and who and what is the guest for you?
Yes, or ghost.
I can, as a sort of anthropologist, that's easy to answer, not necessarily easy to practice, because anthropology has this sort of colonial history and almost colonial practice, so that the other is the relationship with the other in most anthropology, whether it's in another country, whether it's with another, whether for class or whether for gender or whether for race, there's always this superordinate, subordinate relationship of self and other, and that can create bad feelings, strange feelings, also very productive feelings, because a person changes in that relationship or can change in that relationship. Certain things in your personality or your culture is dismantled. I would think that what's happened in the last 20 years or so in this anthropological world, is that it's extremely hard now to define the difference between self and other because of immigration and because of enormous diversity of populations within Europe, within the United States, etc., etc. So it's a constantly moving game, or a constantly moving picture, and that's one of the reasons why I pay a lot of attention to writing, both in the practice of it and in talking about it, because it seems to me that in the writing there's a self-consciousness, which is the same thing as self-consciousness with otherness, whether it's person, culture, or what the writing is about. Hence, I keep perhaps mystically emphasizing the writing, the relationship between the writing and what the writing is about, as if these two discordant planes can, for a brief moment, be one, that words do match what they're about. So that's another angle, another plane, another consideration of the practice of self and otherness, in which the otherness becomes selfhood and selfhood dissolves into otherness as it keeps moving along.
Mm-hmm. I will mainly answer in relation to material, probably, because I mean, for me, compost is a very important material. Both I actually yesterday talking with Michael, I remember that I did create a work in compost. So I did, but this creation of the work in compost actually was made by others, if you want. So it was at the moment in which I decided to work in the prison in the female prison in Giudecca, Venice, with a small group of prisoners, and sharing night dreams. And so in a way, I came to compost through the dreams of the prisoners as a sort of parallel material that will basically, parallel what was the dreams that then I edited in a audio. And I created this compost by asking not only my group, but basically all the prisoners in this small prison around 80 people to choose daily what to throw in a bin that I put in their cell. And it became quite interesting how this composting, it became also a form of messaging. So a sort of talking about what to throw, and also to how to create this material that will actually go out of the prison. They will also talk about a sort of basically, messaging, or a sort of magic that they could realize through throwing this material, like let's throw only eggs, or let's throw only this type of vegetables, and then we see what happens. But it was mainly related with the fact of going out. And in that occasion, I must say, and it happens very often, I'm always in this position that Michael was also talking about, in the sense that when I research and I go to places and I also spend some time, anyway, I'm still a kind of an external person. And in the prison, it was more, because of course, every night I would go out. So I could share dreams together. We could be at the same table, but at a certain point, I will go out of the prison. And so I think that work was for me really a work in which I tried to balance and to understand how to also to show these differences, and how to put it together in this compost and in this editing of dreams.
Thank you to both of you. We have a question from our chat that I now noticed from Caroline, actually. She asked if you can articulate further the war between the mimetic digital chemical industry and this mimetic metamorphosis. Who performs the alternative mimetic?
Can you repeat it?
Can you articulate further the war between the mimetic digital chemical industry and this mimetic metamorphosis? Who performs the alternative mimetic?
Me.
So,
I don't mean that in a purely narcissistic way, heaven forbid. What I mean is it's up to each of us to figure out our strategy. You can't give away all your secrets either.
okay. So, okay, so we keep secret. We probably need to keep secret the more we can.
Yeah. I think bringing mimetic play, which can be deadly, right, to consciousness, to cultural consciousness, would be a first step in mythological warfare. Mythological warfare draws on long traditions and also novel things that are made up at the time when necessary. It's cultural work. It's a quote unquote artistic work. It's fabricating new stories, new clothes, new ways of figuring reality. So the mimetic component of mythological warfare would be embedded in these traditions and others that we have but are not aware of. Becoming aware of things you did. Burroughs once said, he said, I write, he said in a moment of grandeur, something like, I write so that people will become aware of things they knew but didn't know they knew. And at the risk of sounding too mysterious, I'd say the mimetic lies in that. Becoming aware of things we knew but didn't know we knew. That's a very mimetic formulation right there. Things we knew but didn't know we knew. Mimesis lends itself to trickery.
So there are more questions coming from the public. I would like to share them with you. Just a couple, and then I know that we're running out of...
I have to leave in 10 minutes. That's why I keep looking out the window. Yeah.
So the two last questions from Odone Music. Does your account approach, both of Rossella and Michael, gives a nod to a new kind of consideration of non-human entities and agency? Do art and metamorphic Sublime play a unique role in this?
Yes.
And there, a last one.
Well, can you repeat that one again? First one.
Yes. Does your account approach, both of Rossella and Michael, gives a nod to a new kind of consideration of non-human entities and agency?
Yeah, right.
We have been actually speaking about this, Michael, and I was quoting a part of your book in which you were questioning the idea of the term agency, first of all, but also the idea of spirit and the idea of spirit in various sense, for example, in the palm oil, in the oil palms, and then going through, through the idea if they can be subjects instead of objects. And I think that will be maybe interesting also as a to consider as an answer, but I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, sure. My thoughts are undergoing a lot of changes in this regard. I've been reading a translation from a philosopher in Brussels called Vincent Desprez, who's written a book on the dead. Do they really exist? And it's a wonderful, wonderful work. I'm reading it in English. My friend Stephen Mookie has just finished translating it. And the way she approaches this non-human entities, by the spirits of the dead, is to basically tell people stories, starting with their own family. They see their mother in a dream, or they go for a walk and go past a tree that they always walked with that person, and they feel the presence of that dead person. So these are like glimmers and blurring things, not exactly sure, but they have a big impact. And she studies the stories as in terms of their grammar, in terms of their vocabulary, in terms of their sureness or lack of sureness, right? And she says these stories perform ontological leaps. And then she pauses for a minute, and this is typical of her style, but not big ones. They perform ontological leaps, but not huge ones. So in this, with this sort of approach, A, it's based on storytelling. B, it's based on a sort of subjunctive ontological leaps. Perhaps, you're never sure. If they're the non-human entities that you're thinking of in terms of spirits, I really go along with that, and I could add stories of my own. The other non-human entities, of course, are the plants and the chemicals that the chemists and the biologists are working with, and that seems, and in the logic of the digital engineering, I mean, they're all non-human entities which have incredible effects on us.
Vincent Desprez was also in part, we invited Vincent Desprez to be part of Compost. She had a lecture on the occasion of the project. So if you want to add something, Rossella, I would...
Yeah, I don't know if, I mean, to answer this question, because I have been also thinking about my work and how I moved from what are human subjects and their relation, if I can say in a broader way, the relation to systems, to talk more, to be interested in this, in plants or in animals. I did a work that is called Clara on a rhino that was transported from Asia to Rotterdam in the 18th century, and lately I have been thinking in this period also in relation to bodies that are not there, but they are there maybe in some way, in some spirits, and probably this work that I'm doing, that is with the collecting ashes of the olive tree, is somehow related to that. But I think is also, so I think there is a sort of belief in the power of transposing that goes from what was a body to a body that doesn't exist anymore, and if it can be connected somehow through a material. But I think it's still, for example, dust, the ashes of the olive tree, I find them incredible because through the ashes we have a lot of data. So it's so in a way it's a dead body, that is the body of the olive tree. And when I talk about bodies, it generally is about being. So for me, it's about subject, which is a tree, which is a human, and often I connect them, and I connect them also in a broader sense with a sort of landscape. But this, I think these ashes are still kind of a sort of materialistic way to come to the idea of the spirit, because ashes contain a lot. They are still so fertile. So to go back on the idea of compost, ashes are compost, so they can also be used to refertilize. But on the other hand, for example, through ashes we can know how was the life of the tree, if it was poisoned, if it was fertilized with things that actually were not organic, or which kind of life did it have. So in a way, it's this sort of richness that includes everything, and it was a body, but it's also not anymore a body, but it's also not disappeared completely. So yeah.
Thank you. Last question from Hassan Khan, who asked, Trump as a shamanic figure has found a form fitting to present conditions, tapping into marginalized drives. Can you expand on how it relates to present conditions and our collective imaginary?
No, great question, but a long answer. First of all, I think it's strange to call Trump shaman or shamanic. I think that would offend a lot of people. But I do see him as an evil shaman, yeah. And 74 million people, that's a lot of people. And they seem to me under, most of them are under his spell, yeah. No one can explain it. People talk about it all the time, all the time. It's like horrible how much energy is spent on trying to talk about Trump. Maybe it'll die away now that he's out of the White House, but you suspect he might come back, or someone like him will come back. People say someone like him will come back, but smarter. I think Trump is plenty smart. He has been called a fucking moron by one of his cabinet ministers and so forth. But there's a level of intelligence, perhaps it's this shamanic quality intelligence. Shamans can be very bad people. Just because they're shamans doesn't make them groovy. Just because people from Italy or Germany or Amsterdam go to the Amazon rainforest and take ayahuasca doesn't make shamans nice. All right, that's it.
So I think that we run out of time, but it's been a great pleasure being with you. I thank you very much for your generosity. So thank you, Rossella. Thank you, Michael, again, from all the team of Compost. And
ciao.
Thank you.
Ciao. See you next time.